This is a performance called Ghost Dog Rise. Part 1, the story of Ghost Dog. I found Ghost Dog in my local park in the city on the east coast of Scotland where I live. I walk in the park every day. There are grassy fields, a skate park, 2 tennis courts, and a therapy garden used and maintained by a charity that supports veterans struggling with mental health. The park is on a slope, and there are wonderful views. Sometimes there is a haar, which is the Scots word for the thick fog that comes off the ocean. It accumulates and hangs over the river like a substance, like material, which it is. Sometimes I walk with friends. More often, I walk alone. I found Ghost Dog walking by myself one day. Nailed to a tree, there was a small piece of balsa wood, about the size of an A5 card, with yellow printed cursive, reading simply, "You'll be sadly missed, Mungu, 2016 to 2018. The writing was printed over the image of a small dog. The dog was black and white, with pointy ears, and short fur on its body, with a longer cascade of hair on its head, like a wig. The image was faded, and the surface cracked. Ghost Dog became, for me, a main character of the park, key to its gathering weirdness. I think of weirdness as the ordinary gone a little sour. One day I Googled Mungu and dog to see if there was a documented story here. What came up was the website for an animal communicator. Animal communicators communicate with animals, alive and dead. They can do this remotely, over the phone. This animal communicator lived in Switzerland, and there were testimonials on her website from people whose animals she had communicated with. One of the animals was a dog called Mungu, who had died in 2018 during surgery. Now remember that the memorial in my park had given Mungu's lifespan as 2016 to 2018. There was a picture on her website, and I'm not lying when I tell you, I really think it's the same dog. I really do. When I Googled, I also found out that Mungu is a Swahili word, and it means the monotheistic God. So it's possible that the memorial in my park is actually a prayer. I don't know. Part 2. Peter, the believer. There is damp in my basement. The damp is rotting my basement. The rising damp is rotting my basement walls. The damp has a sinister agency. The damp and dampness are related, but not identical. Peter is my landlord. He was 13 in 1957. He grew up in Lincolnshire, in the East Midlands of England, and he has an old-fashioned accent like 1970s BBC. Peter came to talk to me about the work going on in my basement. He said they'd taken out the rotten boards, and the messy excavation work was finished. There was water coming in from outside the house, and a plumber would have to come. Then he asked me about my work. I told him I was listening in on ghosts. He asked if I was a believer. I said I believe in interesting things. He asked if I'd ever had a supernatural encounter, and I said I hadn't. He said it was a frightening thing. I asked if he'd ever had a supernatural encounter, and he said he had. When he was 13, in 1957, his family bought a big house in Lincolnshire. He was an only child, so it was a small family. He, his mother, his father, and his grandmother living in this big house. His father never wanted to go into the attic, but Peter, at 13, liked to set up his model trains. He would often feel like there was someone in the room with him, looking over his shoulder. He would catch movement out of the corner of his eye. The attic was divided into rooms, separated by doors, and he would leave with the doors closed and come back to find them open. One time, Peter was in the attic, absorbed in his model trains, and all of a sudden, the temperature in the room became extremely cold, and a door started opening on its own. Peter ran down the stairs. This kind of thing only ever happens when you're not thinking about it, he said. And it was never anything more than that. I asked if there were stories about the house, and he said, oh yes. One time a medium came to the house, he said. Then he corrected himself and said, a clairvoyant. The clairvoyant said there were 3 entities in the house. The first lived in the front room, and actually his mother knew about that one. She used to talk to it, but she never told anyone about it. There was an entity living on the first floor, and then the unpleasant one in the attic. Something had happened to it there. There were 2 more things, he said. The first is that in any space occupied by a supernatural entity, you can't keep fruit. They used to try to keep apples in the attic because it was cold and dark, and they should have kept the entire season, but they went off straight away. And the other thing is that in a space like this, you'll never find any spiders. There's a saying that spiders are the sign of a healthy home, and Peter the believer says there's more to that than you might think. I walk in the park before work, and after work, and in between work. How is it possible to change everything if the work to change everything can only happen in between everything else? The in-between spaces feel like freedom, or rehearsals for freedom, and also like pressure valves or management techniques. All hope for the future relies on the idea that a walk in the park might also be an infinite space, a space for everything, for anything. Nobody works. And some people write food, and some people write and grow food, and run around, and develop medicine, and dispense medicine, and talk to other people, and lift things, and sweep, and rub dirt off surfaces, and make plans, and bury the dead, and arrange their senses, and fit materials together into new shapes, and travel across land and sea, and make observations, and record and analyze observations, and record music, and carry materials from one place to another, and carry a body from one place to another, and make jokes, and solder components, and lay cable, and analyze the chemistry of air and water and soil, and have sex, and compose images, and translate between languages, and lie around, and eat, and protect children from getting hurt, and help children and adults learn things, and dance in front of people, and treat sewage, and cut hair, and throw or kick balls at different shapes, and test hypotheses, and verify results, and cut hair, and check in, and practice massage, and slaughter some animals for meat, and discuss slaughtering animals for meat, and discuss the animal perspective, and encounter animals, and paint faces, and paint other surfaces, and produce repulsive and intoxicating smells, and learn history, and write history, and lay the foundation for new ideas, and carry food to people, and wash bodies, and clean shit, and vomit, and blood, and help make bodies comfortable, and generate delirious fashions, and throw parties, and go to parties, and answer questions. There was gravel in my mouth. I was lying face down on the pathway, so I turned over onto my back and looked up at the sky. Something licked my hand. It was a small dog with big black eyes and a black and white fringe on its head, like a wig. Mungu, the spirit of the park. All of a sudden, there was a moment of total clarity that exceeded my own subjective comprehension and extended out into the park. All we needed was something to stand in for everything else, a kind of shorthand to make everything comprehensible to all of us. And the beauty would be that in the space between the thing and the thing it stood for, all kinds of drifting and blurring and possibilities for freedom might emerge without anybody having to force anybody else to do anything. Come on, Mungu. You can do it. Come on. Maybe he didn't want this burden of significance. Maybe he knew something we didn't know. Maybe he thought it was up to us. Mungu ran around in a circle, rolled around on the ground, and then popped up and ran off.
That's it, thank you.